be here, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today in this awesome event where we bring together all the communities and share our learning and experience. So let me introduce myself. My name is Khattar. I'm a startup solutions architect with Digico Solutions, a VC-backed startup, and AWS user group Beirut community lead. I spend most of my time between Beirut, Dubai, and Dublin. We're working with startup ecosystems and AWS communities. So for the past 5 years, I've been working with earlier stage startups, VCs, angels, and incubators. I also run my own blog on anaskhattar.com. Check it out when you have time. A little bit about me. I really love working with startups and user groups. You know, the energy is great. The speed that they operate on is fascinating. The most amazing teams come from startups. The agility they have. Startup founders have to wear many hats. But the most common conversation I have in the ecosystem is what we're going to go through today. How do I build my MVP? What is the correct tool or approach to put into this? It can't be only technology, you know, because we all balance technology and startups and our startup needs. And also there is no singular way to do it, you know. But I will present here an approach or a set of tools that you probably never used before, but I think can help you move really quickly and iterate on with it. Happy to take questions. Please stack them till the end or catch me on Twitter. I always reply to my DMs, and happy to get to know each one of you with their individual goals and startup challenges, like what you're doing, what you're building, what kind of problems you're facing. So DM me, I'm on Twitter. I'll always reply. Okay, so what will we cover today? So we're going to cover in this talk these 4 topics. Obviously, what's an MVP? Successful startups, the dev team processes and habits, architectural patterns for MVP and startups, as well security and databases. So I'm gonna cover everything on the ground level. The reason for doing this is because some of you are technical and some of you are not technical. If you're technical, I'm sorry, I have to water things down because this is a very inclusive talk for, especially for startups. But if you're technical and have deeper technical questions and want to go beyond where I'm gonna go in this talk, there are also awesome solution architects on schedule today and tomorrow in this community day. Please connect with them or just DM me to link you or with special technical questions. Honestly, thinking about this and writing it down, this is the closest I could get to an MVP process or a startup process. So you got a hypothesis. If you don't have a hypothesis, you should really get a hypothesis. You don't really build something because you can, but you want to know what is the right thing to build. What does my customers care about? Also, really have a tight and measurable hypothesis that's clear and defined before you start writing code to make sure it's worth your time. Then you want to build this, and ideally, you want to build the minimum possible to disprove that hypothesis. If you can't, then you keep going. You need to measure, because you can't disapprove or prove something if you don't measure it. Once you measure, you can start to learn and iterate. And as you iterate onwards, you will then start building or altering the first phase. You know, you can see that the build, measure, iterate phase is continuous, as you can see over here. So you can keep going round and round, you know, although we have a scale at the end. But even scale is a build, measure, iterate phase in itself as well, you know. So there's no real distinction between them. Think about the clarity of what you're trying to achieve, because when you want to measure something, you want something that's singular within your aim. I speak to a lot of startups, but when I ask them what their benefit is, I get a list. It's really always good to start with the clear and singular mission, something that you can deliver, that's crisp to your customers. You want to make sure it's measurable as well. You know, if you can't measure it, I insist you can't know if you succeed against your metric or not. Know what's the right value to get to, but you need at least to have a measure to know where you are in relative terms. It might not be very accurate, but at least you have a measure to back your data. What we say is like the hypothesis is incredibly important for you to frame what your business is around. Okay, minimum X product. So MVP is a very important term. It stands for minimum viable product. It's the first product that you build and is the product that gets your startup to the product market fit phase. It's not a prototype, so it's not to be confused with a prototype. A prototype is something else. You create a prototype to see if your idea is feasible, if it's like a hardware idea, or help you find a happy path in UX for your users, to know how they experience your web app or mobile app, or just get a visual so that people can see what you are trying to build. So MVP is not a prototype. And there are certain situations where you build a prototype before you build an MVP, or you might have both an MVP and a prototype to be testing things on the side. So an MVP is the minimum number of features to test your hypothesis that we talked about earlier. And it's very important because a lot of people overbuild their MVP. It's very common, especially when you have people who never been around software development teams before or worked in a startup development team. It's where you see a lot of overbuilding, and overbuilding is expensive, especially for startups where they are burning resources without revenue yet during the MVP process. So overbuilding happens when you build features beyond what is needed to test this hypothesis. So if you want to get a good example of an MVP, let's take Kareem, for example. Kareem, the ride-hailing app. What's Kareem trying to solve originally when they first released their product? They are trying to see if peer-to-peer transportation could work. So the minimum number of features they need to test their hypothesis is, number one, the driver being able to sign up and log in. Number two, the rider being able to sign up and log in. Number three, rider being able to request a driver, and the driver being able to find that rider. And number four, a form of payment to be exchanged between two parties, which Kareem can take their cut off. So it's only 4 features. That's all the basic features needed without all the features you see on Kareem right now, like share your app or your ride, or social media, or add a stop, or like hundreds of other features. If they had it on their MVP, these features, it wouldn't be an MVP anymore. It would be an overbuild. So we see here there are on this slide, there are other terms for minimum viable product. Let's cover them here. So the viable, it's the most commonly referred to. And it's a completely new product. What they mean by an MVP, a completely new product to test new dimensions of the product. It could be a minimum usable product, MUP, which is to get your product in the hands of customers, see how usable it is, to get early feedback. Or lovable, for example. If you release a minimum lovable product, you're assuming that the products in the market right now are disliked by the customers. And you're releasing a minimum lovable product saying that, like, I think I can do better with better than an X competitor, and here's why. This is our MLP. Testable is minimum testable product is good for risky business assumptions. For example, Airbnb would want to test if people would rent out their houses to other people, and people would sleep at other houses when they started out. This is a famous quote: "If you aren't embarrassed by your first version of your product, you are too late to market and shipped too late." Reid Hoffman, LinkedIn co-founder. It's a very famous quote. Remember, it should be very minimal, and it doesn't matter how great the UI or the UX looks. It just needs to be functional, because you are trying to prove a single hypothesis with the minimum number of features. This quote gives you exactly the guideline of when you should release your product. I've met a lot of startup founders who are perfectionists. I'm a perfectionist as well, but you shouldn't wait until your product is perfect. It's not an MVP, but you should wait until it's functional and usable at the least basic minimal state and ship it out and get people to start using it and see if they actually like it or not. Because if they need it, they wouldn't care how it looks like or how beautiful it is. They're just gonna start using it immediately. How many people would actually care about how Kareem looks like? Few people only care because when you need a ride, you need a ride. Why do you care if there's a button to request a ride in this way or the way I'm paying the driver? Great, I just need a ride. There's a button, I can press it, and then I can pay the driver. I'm all set. This is basically an MVP. So it's good if you are a perfectionist, but there should be someone on the team who push you to ship before you are ready. Okay, so let's take a look at this approach of how you think about your hypothesis or MVP. So if you can imagine this pyramid or stack of what a product is, so this is what you want at the end. You want everything colored in and everything completed, usable, valuable, reliable, of course, to scale and to be a great experience that's beautiful for all users. I spend a lot of time with people trying to build MVPs, and we all try to take a slice of them and build them out. If you're a designer, let's say, there's a very good chance you'll start from the top and you'll have an incredibly beautiful MVP. Or if you're an engineer with infrastructure background, you'd have an incredibly scalable product. Or if you're a site reliability engineer or DevOps, it's going to be reliable. If you're on the business side and like business analyst and get that proposition right, it would be a really valuable product. Or if you're an application engineer, it would be really usable. So the question is, which one of these do I do? Which one would focus on? The simplest way to describe it is if you focus on one of them, you don't want to go too wide. I made this slide to show you like how I imagine an MVP is. You want to actually touch on all of them. So imagine this as an approach. Your MVP needs to add this certain slice of every single thing of those things. That's why it's really important to think what's the minimum feature that will allow you to build your product, your MVP. So MVP is obviously not a customer-facing term. While your first customers are going to be your early adopters and your product still needs work, but you don't want to do what this diagram says. This is exactly what we call an overbuild. Instead, if we're trying to solve the hypothesis of transportation for people, we might start with a skateboard, maybe. You can see here. And then move to a scooter and then get more complicated from there. That's why an MVP should be the real bare bones of your app. It shouldn't be the wheel or the tire, and you don't release until you wait until you have the whole car. That's an overbuild. Don't get distracted with features outside your scope, and don't get distracted by things that don't prove your hypothesis at the basic core level. It's better to have something that flows, that can progressively be useful. Each one of these phases could be considered a product in itself. If you were to build the wheels in the first phase and then the engine in the second, you wouldn't have something usable. Whereas if my goal is to get from A to B via transportation, in the first phase as a skateboard, I can get from A to B. And then in the second phase as a scooter, I can get from A to B and bike, etc. So your vision from one place to another, but better, and it's getting better every time, over and over. But it's still a minimum viable product at each phase. It's an iteration. So let's get to the next topic: successful startup dev team processes. Iterations and sprints. So development is typically done in iterations. It looks pretty much like this. You're gonna build some features, deploy it, and then measure it, and then keep going in this loop. It's a process, but it helps you build fast, quickly, and deliver incremental value to your customers at each one of those loops. So the aim is to improve your product with every iteration by a small %. You run sprints, which are uninterrupted plans or agendas for 1 or 2 weeks, usually, of what you're going to build. And you have to separate your product out to sprints so that the tasks get done fast while you're iterating. So maybe each one of those loops is a sprint by itself. So planning the sprint, this is a chart to show you what is important and where you should spend most of your time. So how do you prioritize your, like, what's getting done in each sprint? If you look at the horizontal line, slow to build and fast to build. So the cutoff line for speed, if it can fit in a single sprint for a single developer, and the cutoff line for impact is, do you meaningfully believe it will change a metric you care about? The bottom right, it's very tempting, distractions. So even if it's quick to implement, it has little value to your customers and it's not gonna impact your metric at all. But don't put it in your planning sessions, if it's a distraction feature. The top right is obvious, the focus area. This is where all your focus should be of your sprints, quick to build and high impact. On the top left, you got breakdown. These things are necessary. They're large features that need to be built. They are important for your MVP, but you cannot build them in the same sprint. You have to break them into different sprints. And they are usually slow to build, but have high impact. And on the bottom left is undifferentiated. So developers sometimes like to be super technical and build your own database, for example. If you got these kinds of tasks in your sprint, you're doing it wrong, obviously. You have a lot of managed services from AWS. So unless your product is a database itself, no one really cares what's the underlying technology and the value it gives them. So don't spend time on heavy lifting. I repeat, you are a startup. So we have to minimize tasks. If the feature is too big to fit in a sprint, we need to break it up into parts. We need to reduce big tasks so that we get big features that are valuable, but they are too big to work on in one sprint. So we break them down. So the minimum task size should be one engineer can handle it in one sprint. And does it add incremental value? If we're trying to frame the task. Reducing scope to minimum amount of features, just enough to prove your hypothesis, removes ambiguity and confusion with developers. Okay, stand-ups. Stand-ups are really another important thing for your team that you should get in the habit of, and you should do them every day. A stand-up is where you bring everyone together from all teams, and the first thing that they do is just give a status update, and they should be really bounded by 1 minute max per person. And you can say what you did yesterday, what you're planning on to do today, and if there's anything that's blocking you or you're stuck on something. And it should be a total of 15 minutes max. You don't want this to take up a lot of time. It's just a stand up for your team on a daily basis. If you're working remotely, you should still have some form of stand up as well, maybe through Zoom if you're in the same time zone, or use Slack to drop up a message if you're in different time zones. This helps speed up the communication within teams a lot. And during the days, it would you do a stand up in the beginning of the day, and there's no more meetings during the day, so we don't get distracted during a sprint. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the CI/CD tools. Deploying features builds momentum. Every time you deploy a feature, the whole team feels happy and proud about it. And each sprint should end with a feature that is deployed so users can get feedback as well. You can get feedback from users. AWS has a service called CodeStar. CodeStar creates a continuous delivery tool chain in minutes to manage all your software development activities all in one place. Optimize for learning. I'm sure you will build great technology, but at this stage, it's better to learn before optimizing. Experiment often and liberally use templates and tutorials to try services and products and new technologies. The better you explore, the more idea you have of what works and what doesn't. And know when to prototype and what's the difference, as we spoke earlier. Like a prototype is an experiment. Always remember that to prove one thing. It's always better to prototype outside your MVP. It's quicker, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't break your MVP. All right, so now we are on the architectural patterns of startups. There are many different ways to build on AWS. There is virtually no limits of how these services can be combined. Here we will talk about some architectures which many people use to build their MVPs. Use them as a guide, start and expand your product as you develop further. It's like a starting point for you. Monoliths. So starting with a monolith is often a right choice for a startup since it allows for fast development at an early stage because you don't need to design the process boundaries ahead of time. A monolith has everything for you. A well-designed monolith can be scaled horizontally and can be broken up later if you need to. And depending on the type of monolith of the product, you may never outgrow the scaling capacity of a well-designed monolith. So AWS has a nice service. It's called AWS Lightsail. Lightsail makes it easy to deploy monolithic applications like WordPress, Joomla, or Magento, and web applications with pre-configured development stacks like LAMP or Nginx or Node.js. With Lightsail, you can get online quickly and simply. Then another nice service from AWS, it's called Elastic Beanstalk. Elastic Beanstalk is an easy-to-use service for deploying instances and scaling web applications and services developed in Java, .NET, PHP, Node.js, Python, Ruby, Go, and Docker. You can just upload your code and Elastic Beanstalk will automatically handle the deployment, capacity provisioning, load balancing, auto-scaling, application health monitoring. Microservices. Microservices make it easy to build and scale large applications. Each service is tasked with doing one thing and doing it well. It's a service designed to do a specific use case with its relevant data model and infrastructure to support it, making it easy to scale individual services independently. Although each service does one thing, but as a whole, they combine to provide a full suite of functionality to users. In a well-designed microservices architecture, if any individual microservice is not working, then other parts of the application will still function. Also, we have serverless. Serverless is an easy way to build microservices. In this example architecture for an API, you can see how microservices is built with different AWS services. Initially, your API receives a request from the client system. API gateway routes the traffic to Lambda. Next, you build a web client and extend it easily by adding authentication with Cognito and store and pre-process data in S3. Later, you can add a mobile client and deploy containers with Fargate, and further extend it by making API gateway route to any AWS service. Amplify is a pretty nice tool and framework by AWS. It's a set of developer tools for building, testing, deploying, and hosting the entire application, front end and back end. And this application, in this example, you can build a mobile application and a web front end using React Native, for example. The website is hosted on S3 and CloudFront, and AppSync provides a managed GraphQL endpoint for your clients. You can use Aurora or DynamoDB to store and retrieve data. Next, it can be extended by adding authentication with Cognito and additional data sources such as Elastic Cache, for example. You can integrate with Lambda. It allows you to connect to any external data resource as well. There's also Amplify console. It's very helpful. It can deploy static websites or single-page applications. And it supports frameworks like React, Angular, or Vue.js, or static site generators like Gatsby or Hugo or Jekyll. Okay, so this is very important. Overinvest where it's difficult to change as a startup. Some decisions that you will now make will stick around for a long time and will be very important. These decisions are usually about security and data storage or data. So invest the time upfront now. Your customers expect that your application is secure and the data they share with you is kept private. And with AWS, you can be as secure as the most security-sensitive organizations in the world by taking advantage of the most security controls and of many security controls and services. Most of those organizations use. They are available from AWS. So let's start. Like for example, for web applications, we've got Cognito, Certificate Manager, and CloudFront. They give you secure user authentication, SSL certificates, and DDoS protection. Next, we have IAM. IAM allows you to manage access to AWS resources securely using maybe multi-factor authentication and for additional protection. AWS Secrets Manager or Parameter Store. It securely stores your application secrets. AWS Shield is a managed DDoS protection service. System Manager allows secure session access to AWS instances or EC2 instances. And also when working with enterprises or regulated industry, you can use services like CloudTrail, and this enables governance, compliance, and operational auditing and risk auditing of your AWS account. You've got the AWS Key Management Service, KMS, allows you to manage keys and control the use of encryption across a wide range of AWS services. And at the end of this slide, we have AWS Organizations, which allows you to centrally manage your billing, access control access and compliance and security, and share resources across several AWS accounts. Okay, so we talked about this. Decisions about data modeling and store lasts longer than expected, way longer. So in the extra time now, it will pay off later for sure. First, think about your data model and how the entities relate to each other, for example, and how this data will be reread and used in the future. Then consider the access patterns, the read-write ratio, durability, security, cost, availability requirements. With this information and this table, we can make important choices. So if you're building a monolith or a familiar relational or familiar with relational databases, for example, then a relational database service Aurora is suitable for a large number of applications and can scale further by using elastic cache. But then for microservices, you should look for an independent data store for each service. The narrow characteristics and probably scaling requirements of microservices make key value or document stores like DynamoDB or DocumentDB a very good fit for your application. And for more specialized services, look for Neptune for graph databases, and TimeStream for time series data, or Console Ledger database for immutable ledgers. At the end, to gain more confidence and hands-on experience as a startup, you can access digital training by AWS experts on AWS.training, or you can join a user group at one of our many user groups in the region, AWS MENA.community. Check it out. Thank you guys, and enjoy building with AWS. Thank you.